G'day Figo, thanks for the comment. So what's your opinion on SMSF to buy property to help me set myself up for retirement? I already own a property of my own already. Now, this is not advice. I can't give you personal advice on TikTok. SMSF is very complicated and there are a lot of pros and cons, so I do urge you to seek financial advice. If you want some help with this, feel free to jump on the link in my bio. But let me give you a little bit of a crash course of some of the things to consider. Now, we've got to understand a self-managed super fund, or an SMSF, is a very popular strategy for people who have a reasonably sized retirement savings balance in superannuation that will allow them to be able to have more control over their superannuation savings. As a general rule of thumb, when you look at the ATO guidelines, they typically state, I believe, about $300,000 to $500,000 as a minimum combined balance between you and your significant other before considering a self-managed superannuation fund. The reason for this is it's going to cost you in the vicinity of about $5,000 to get the SMSF set up, to make sure that you do it properly. So that's basically setting up the SMSF trust, setting up the corporate trustee, getting the statement of advice, which recommends your investment strategy and how you actually go and invest all of the funds, and then getting assistance with the handling all of the rollovers, setting up the appropriate insurance, all of that kind of stuff. So in the vicinity is going to cost you about $5,000, and then typically it's going to cost you about $3,000 a year ongoing in order to maintain the self-managed superannuation fund. So at a $500,000 balance, year one that represents 1% of your balance, and then year two it's about 0.7. So considering that most industry superannuation funds charge a fraction of a percent, that's really where it starts to become economical. Now, the reason why many people look to SMSF is it gives them the opportunity to buy property. And typically if you're buying property using leverage, it's going to be even more expensive because you need to set up what's called an LRBA, or a limited recourse borrowing arrangement. What that basically means is that inside the SMSF, the rules state that the bank can only take security over the property itself. It can't take security over any of the other assets in the fund. And in order for that to be enacted, there must be a limited recourse borrowing arrangement through what's called a bare trust, which essentially means that you need to set up a second trust and a second trustee for that in order to take place. So that's probably going to cost you another couple of grand at least. The other thing to consider is that borrowing inside your superannuation fund is typically a much higher interest rate because it is limited recourse. So usually it's about 2% higher than your standard variable rate, and it must be principal and interest. And usually the loan to value ratio is much less than a residential property held personally. So most of our clients, when they set up an SMSF, they usually have lending at a maximum of 70%, in an ideal case 50% or less. So these are a couple of things to consider. SMSF is not for everyone. You take on a lot of risk and responsibility, and you need to be confident in your ability to run the fund. The ATO has some guidance, so if you go into their portal and you can find a whole heap of educational material, and there's even what's called a trustee test, because you are now personally liable for the decisions that you make. And if you get things wrong, that they can issue what's called speeding tickets, which is fines that you need to pay personally for any of those mistakes that you may make. And that could be as little as, like, for example, accidentally paying a personal expense through the SMSF. You'd be surprised, but many people do it. There's plenty of things that you can get wrong with an SMSF, but for people who have a substantial amount of retirement savings, it can be a really great strategy. So once again, it's about getting the right advice, making sure that you set it up properly, and making sure that you choose the right property to be able to implement that strategy. So once again, if there's something you want some help with, feel free to reach out, but hopefully this was helpful.